Hello everyone and welcome back to AP Bio with AP Playground. Today we're covering topic 1.5, lipids. Lots of objectives today, base of which is describing the structure and function of lipids, looking at both saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, as well as the various functions of lipids, including fats, steroids, cholesterol, and phospholipids. And the suggested skill is argumentation 6E, predict the causes or effects of a change in or disruption to one or more components in a biological system. So unlike the other macromolecules we've talked about, lipids don't have specific monomers or building blocks that make them up, so they're not polymers. There are no Lego bricks that make up an entire set with lipids. However, lipids still do have multiple components, which we'll look into later. And they fall under the category of biological macromolecules because of their size and importance to life. So they are still large molecules, which is the definition of macromolecules, and they are extremely important, as we'll see in a few further slides. And they also consist of CHO, just like carbohydrates, meaning they consist of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Now, very crucial, all lipids are hydrophobic, meaning they are all water repellent, except for phospholipids, but those are special. So let's talk about some different types of lipids. First of all, we have fats, otherwise known as triglycerides. And as you might imagine, there's going to be something 3 within triglycerides, and a triglyceride is composed of a glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acid chains, just as seen here. So here's our glycerol molecule, and there's our fatty acid chains, and they're just hydrocarbon chains, meaning just a line of carbons bound to each other with hydrogens. And there's also going to be steroids, which are 4 carbon rings, and steroids are extremely key because they are the hormones that can greatly affect behavior. And so the different fatty acids that we have within our triglycerides can either be saturated or unsaturated. And a saturated fatty acid means that all carbons have been hydrogenated, meaning that every single carbon in this hydrocarbon chain has hydrogen atoms attached to it, as we can see up here. However, sometimes fatty acids are unsaturated, meaning that not all carbons have a hydrogen atom, and as such, these carbons become double bound to each other, creating what is called a kink in the hydrocarbon chain. And so the saturated fatty acids are solids at room temperature because they are able to maintain a rigid structure due to the saturated fatty acids. However, unsaturated fatty acids are liquids at room temperature because of the kinks that prevent a solid and rigid structure between the hydrocarbon chains. Now on to phospholipids. And so phospholipids are the major component of cell membranes. And the cell membrane is the semi-permeable barrier around a cell that controls what goes in and out of the cell and also provides some structural support for the cell. And phospholipids have a few components, and a hydrophilic component and a hydrophobic component. Remember, hydrophilic meaning water-loving and hydrophobic meaning water-hating, which is why phospholipids are the exception to all lipids are nonpolar or hydrophobic. And that's because of this phosphate group up here, which is going to be polar or charged. And as a result, it will be hydrophilic. However, the phospholipid also has what's called a hydrophobic tail, and this tail is made up of fatty acid or hydrocarbon chains like we looked at in the previous slide. And of course, they can be saturated or unsaturated. And within the cell membrane, they are arranged in the shape of a bilayer, where, as you can see, there's going to be a bilayer, so 2-layer, and the heads are all going to be facing away from each other. So one layer of phospholipids is facing this way while the other is facing this way. The reason for this is inside the cell, it's what's known as an aqueous solution. So there's water-based content within the cell. So of course, the hydrophilic region is going to be pointing towards that, is going to be facing towards that. The hydrophobic region is repelled from it. So this is our inside of the cell. And then the outside of the cell is also going to be fairly water-based. So this is the outside of the cell. And so the phospholipid heads are going to orient themselves in that way, and the phospholipid tails are going to be repelled by the aqueous solutions. And we'll discuss phospholipids and the cell membrane more in Unit 2. So as you can see, the structure of lipids is crucial to their function and greatly affects it. And now we're going to go more into the functions of lipids. So lipids store energy, and we talked about carbohydrates storing short-term energy, but lipids, they store long-term energy. It's a big energy storage. And they also provide insulation and protection for vital organs, fat. And they can also make up membranes, just like we looked at phospholipids, and act as hormones, such as steroids. And cholesterol is the base steroid from which hormones are derived. And remember, these steroids are going to be 4 carbon rings. And so now let's look at our AAA rule. How does appearance affect activity? Why are carbs used for short-term energy instead of lipids? And if we take a look at a triglyceride here, at a fatty acid, and their fatty acid chains, you can see that lipids, they have lots of hydrocarbon chains. And because they're so large, they can store a lot of energy within the bonds, but it is more difficult to break apart the bonds here to release that energy. So then lipids become your long-term energy, whereas carbs, because starch and glycogen are arranged in a way so that it is easy to break the bonds between the individual glucose molecules, are going to be used for short-term energy. So again, appearance does affect activity. The structure of a macromolecule will affect its function. So there you have it. No lipids are hydrophobic. We've got our saturated and unsaturated fatty acid chains, which are going to be potentially solid, potentially liquid, depending on the saturation. And then we have steroids, we have phospholipids, we have triglycerides, and they have a function of storing long-term energy, providing insulation, being part of membranes, and also acting as hormones. See you in 1.6. Nucleic acids.